I still can't sleep through the night. 3 years have passed and I still wake up at 2:47 a.m., drenched in sweat, listening for footsteps that shouldn't exist. My therapist says it's PTSD. My former supervisor says I had a mental breakdown. But I know what I experienced in St. Augustine's Hospital that night, and I know why I'll never set foot in that building again. Let me start from the beginning, because the details matter, every single one of them. My name is Marcus, and in the fall of 2021, I was working as a night security guard at St. Augustine's Hospital in a mid-sized city I won't name. It wasn't my dream job, far from it, but it paid better than most overnight work, and the tasks were simple enough. Walk the rounds every 2 hours, monitor the camera feeds, log any incidents, and make sure the building stayed secure while the skeleton night staff did their work. Easy money, or so I thought. St. Augustine's was old, not historic landmark old, but old enough that parts of it felt wrong in that inexplicable way some buildings do. The original structure dated back to the 1960s, with newer wings added in the decades since. The layout was confusing, corridors that seemed to lead nowhere, stairwells that didn't quite match up between floors, rooms that had been repurposed so many times their original function was lost to memory. But the worst part, the part everyone who worked there knew about, was the 4th floor of the East Wing. It had been closed for renovations for almost 18 months when I started working there. Budget issues, they said, asbestos remediation, structural concerns, the usual bureaucratic explanations. But there were stories. There are always stories in old hospitals. The older nurses would lower their voices when they talked about it. They'd mention how the 4th floor had been the psychiatric ward back in the 70s and 80s, before mental health care was moved to a newer facility across town. They'd talk about the patients who died there, not just from illness, but from the treatments that seemed barbaric to today's standards: electroshock therapy, chemical restraints, isolation rooms where people were forgotten for days. My supervisor, a gruff man named Bill who'd worked security at St. Augustine's for over 20 years, had only one rule about the 4th floor: don't go up there, ever. The doors are locked for a reason. I followed that rule religiously. For 3 months, I did my rounds, avoided the 4th floor, and went home each morning as the sun came up, grateful for another uneventful shift. The work was boring, sure, but boring was good. Boring was safe. Then came the night of December 17th. I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m., just like always. The evening guard, Tommy, seemed eager to leave, more eager than usual, I noticed, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He muttered something about it being a weird night and practically ran to his car. I watched him through the lobby windows, saw him sit in his vehicle for a moment before driving off, and I remember thinking his hands looked shaky on the steering wheel. The first few hours passed normally. I did my initial rounds at 11 p.m., basement, 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, then back down. The hospital at night had its own rhythm, its own sounds, the hum of industrial HVAC systems, the distant beep of monitors, the occasional page over the intercom for a doctor or nurse. The emergency room would sometimes get busy, but that was on the opposite end of the building from my patrol route. Mostly, I walked through empty corridors, my flashlight cutting through the dim emergency lighting, my footsteps echoing off tile floors. At 1 a.m., I settled into the security office to review the camera feeds and fill out my log. This was my routine: 2 hours of walking, 2 hours of sitting, repeat until 6 a.m. when the day shift arrived. I had a small coffee maker in the office, a laptop for watching videos, and a radio that picked up maybe 3 stations if I held it at the right angle. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard it. A sound from the camera monitoring system. Not an alarm, I would have recognized that immediately. This was different. a notification chime I'd never heard before, followed by text appearing on one of the screens. Motion detected. East wing, floor 4, corridor B. I stared at the message, confused. The 4th floor wasn't even in the active camera grid. When they'd closed it down for renovation, they'd shut off everything up there. Power, cameras, even the water. There shouldn't have been any way for those cameras to detect anything because they weren't supposed to be on. I checked the camera feeds list. Sure enough, cameras for the 4th floor were showing as offline, just like they had been for months. But that notification definitely said floor 4. Probably just a glitch in the system, I told myself. Old equipment, outdated software, these things happened. But my hands were trembling slightly as I typed the incident into my log. 1:17 a.m. False motion detection from inactive camera system, 4th floor, east wing. No action taken. I tried to go back to my video, some crime documentary I'd been watching to pass the time, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the camera monitors, waiting for that notification to appear again.
At 2 a.m., I forced myself to start my next round. The hospital felt different than it had just 2 hours earlier, though I couldn't explain why. The silence seemed heavier. The shadows cast by the emergency lights seemed to stretch longer. My footsteps sounded too loud. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I'd let a computer glitch get into my head, and now I was acting like a scared kid. I was a grown man, 32 years old, walking through an empty hospital with a flashlight and a radio. There was nothing to be afraid of. The basement was fine. The 1st floor was fine. The 2nd floor was fine. But when I reached the 3rd floor, I noticed something that made me stop mid-stride. At the far end of the corridor, where the hallway terminated at a set of double doors marked East Wing, authorized personnel only, there was a light. Not the emergency lighting that ran throughout the building, but a different light, flickering, yellowish, like old fluorescent tubes struggling to stay alive. The light was coming from under the doors, from the 4th floor stairwell. I stood there frozen, my flashlight pointed at those doors, my mind racing through explanations. Maybe maintenance had gone up there. Maybe they'd restored power for some reason and forgotten to mention it. Maybe... The light went out. Complete darkness returned to the end of the hallway, and I was left standing there with my heart hammering in my chest, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. I walked closer. Each step felt like a small act of courage I had to force myself to take. When I reached the doors, I pressed my ear against them, listening. Nothing, just the ambient hum of the building. I checked the door handles, even though I knew they'd be locked. They were. A heavy chain with a padlock secured them shut, just like always, with a faded sign warning about asbestos remediation. Everything was exactly as it should be. But I had seen that light. I was certain of it. At 2:40 a.m., I returned to the security office and immediately reviewed the camera footage for the 3rd floor. I watched myself walking down the corridor, approaching the East Wing doors, pressing my ear against them. But on the camera feed, there was no light visible under the doors. The end of the hallway looked completely dark, just as it should have. Either the camera's angle wasn't right to capture it, or I was losing my mind. I called Bill, my supervisor. It went to voicemail. I tried to leave a message that didn't sound crazy. "Hey Bill, it's Marcus. Just wanted to check if maintenance is doing any work on the 4th floor tonight. I saw some lights up there and wanted to make sure everything's squared away. Give me a call back when you get this." At 2:47 a.m., the temperature in the security office dropped. I don't mean it got a little cooler. I mean the temperature plummeted so suddenly and so dramatically that I could see my breath misting in the air. My coffee, which had been hot moments before, developed a thin skin of ice on its surface. And in that sudden cold, I heard something that turned my blood to frozen sludge in my veins. Footsteps. Not from the hallway outside the security office, from above. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Walking, stopping, walking again. They were coming from the 4th floor. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands and switched to the channel the night nurses used. "This is Marcus in security. Is anyone on the 4th floor of the East Wing?" Static. "Repeat, this is security. Is anyone working on the 4th floor tonight?" A voice cracked through, one of the ICU nurses. "Marcus, nobody's up there. That floor has been closed for over a year. Why?" The footsteps above me stopped, and the silence that replaced them was somehow worse. "No reason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just checking. Thanks." I sat there in that freezing office, listening to nothing, feeling something I hadn't felt since childhood, that primitive, instinctive terror that tells you you're not alone, even when you can't see anyone, that tells you you're being watched, even in the dark. The cold began to recede gradually. Within 5 minutes, the temperature had returned to normal. The ice on my coffee melted, and I was left wondering if I'd experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by stress or lack of sleep. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I'd felt. At 3:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Bill. "Don't go up to the 4th floor. Stay in your office until I get there."
He'd never come in during a night shift before. Never. "What's going on?" I texted back. The 3 dots indicating he was typing appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Just stay put. I'm 20 minutes away." Those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. I watched the camera feeds obsessively, switching between views, looking for anything unusual. The hospital seemed normal. A few nurses moving through the 3rd floor ICU, an orderly pushing a cart on the 2nd floor, the emergency room entrance where the occasional ambulance would arrive. Everything normal, everything fine, except I could feel it, a wrongness that had settled over the building like a heavy blanket. The air felt thick. The silence between sounds felt expectant, like the building itself was holding its breath. At 3:33 a.m., every light in the security office went out. Not just the office, the entire hospital plunged into darkness. Emergency systems should have kicked in immediately. Battery-powered lights, backup generators, all the fail-safes that hospitals are required to have. Nothing. Absolute darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands clumsy with panic, and finally got it on. The beam seemed weak, swallowed up by the overwhelming black. My radio crackled with confused voices, nurses asking what happened, someone from the ER demanding to know why the generators hadn't activated. And then I heard it again. The footsteps. Closer this time, not above me anymore, but in the hallway outside my security office. Slow, methodical, coming toward my door. I wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but my voice had abandoned me. I could only sit there, frozen, listening to those footsteps approach. They had a strange quality to them, a wetness, like someone walking in shoes that were soaked through. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. The handle began to turn. I'd locked it. I always locked it during night shifts, but the handle was turning anyway, slowly, testing. Then it stopped. Silence. I waited, my flashlight trained on that door, my heart beating so hard I thought it might burst. A shadow appeared in the gap under the door. Not the shadow of feet, but something else, something that seemed to spread like liquid, seeping into the room. The lights came back on. Everywhere in the hospital, power returned in a sudden flood of fluorescent brightness. My radio exploded with relieved chatter. The security monitors flickered back to life. I looked at the door. The handle was still. The gap underneath showed nothing but the empty hallway beyond. My phone rang, making me jump so violently I nearly dropped it. Bill.
"Marcus, are you okay?" "The lights went out," I said, my voice hoarse. "Everything went dark, and there was someone outside my office." "Lock your door and don't leave that room. I'm pulling into the parking lot now." He ended the call. I checked the door again, still locked. I looked at the camera feed for the hallway outside my office, rewinding to the moment the power had gone out. The cameras were off during the blackout, of course, but when the power came back, they showed the hallway exactly as it should be, empty. No one there. No one had been there, but I'd heard those footsteps. I'd seen that shadow. Bill burst into the security office 5 minutes later, looking pale and decades older than his 60 years. He locked the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing hard.
"Tell me exactly what happened tonight," he said. I told him everything. The motion detection alert from the 4th floor, the light under the east wing doors, the footsteps, the cold, the blackout, the handle turning. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that chilled me more than anything else that had happened that night. "It's happening again." "What's happening again?" He moved to the monitors, checking the camera feeds with the practiced eye of someone who'd been doing this job for decades. When he seemed satisfied that we were alone, he sat down heavily in the other chair. "This is going to sound crazy," he said. "Hell, I've spent 20 years trying to convince myself it was crazy. But you need to know, because you're going to have to decide whether you want to keep working here." He told me the story. 18 months ago, before the 4th floor was closed, a patient had gone missing from the psychiatric ward. A young woman named Sarah Vance, 26 years old, admitted for severe depression and psychotic episodes. She'd been there for 3 weeks, responding well to treatment according to her doctors. No one expected what happened. On the night of June 3rd, 2020, Sarah Vance walked out of her room during the shift change when the nurses were distracted. The 4th floor had exits to the stairwells, of course, but they were supposed to be alarmed. Somehow, she'd made it through without triggering any alerts. They found her 2 days later in the sub-basement in an old maintenance tunnel that hadn't been used in years. She'd hanged herself with torn bedsheets tied together. But here's what they didn't tell the public, what didn't make it into any reports. Sarah Vance's body was found in a part of the sub-basement that should have been impossible for her to reach. The entrance to that tunnel had been sealed shut with concrete 30 years earlier, after a series of accidents involving hospital workers getting lost in the old maintenance areas. There was no way she could have gotten in there, and yet she had. After they found her, Bill said, his voice low, things started happening on the 4th floor. Nurses would hear footsteps in empty rooms. Equipment would turn on by itself. Patients complained about a woman standing at the foot of their beds, watching them, a woman with wet hair and sad eyes. "They closed the floor because of that?" I asked. "No," Bill said. "They closed the floor because 3 patients tried to kill themselves in the span of 1 week, all of them in the same room where Sarah Vance had stayed. 3 patients who'd been stable, who'd shown no signs of suicidal ideation, who all claimed they had to do it because she asked them to." The security office felt very small suddenly, very cold. The hospital administration decided it was easier to blame structural issues and asbestos than to admit they might have a problem they couldn't solve with medicine and therapy. So they locked it down, moved the psychiatric patients elsewhere, and figured time would take care of the rest. "But it hasn't," I said. "No," Bill agreed. "Every few months, something happens. The guards who work nights start reporting strange things. Most of them quit within a few weeks. That's why they hired you. You were the 5th guard in 6 months. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was hoping it was over. It's been quiet for almost 3 months. I thought maybe—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter what I thought. You know now." We sat there in silence, listening to the hospital settling around us. The normal sounds felt different now, loaded with possibility. Every creak could be footsteps. Every mechanical hum could be a voice. "So what do I do?" I asked. Bill looked at me with something like pity. "You finish your shift. You go home, and you decide if you're coming back tomorrow night." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to stay here with you until dawn. Make sure you're safe." "And then?" He didn't answer. We made it through the rest of that shift together, both of us jumping at every sound, checking the cameras obsessively. The 4th floor remained dark and quiet on the monitors, but I kept expecting to see that motion detection alert pop up again. It never did.
At 6 a.m., the day shift arrived and the hospital transformed back into a normal workplace. Doctors arrived for their rounds. Administrative staff filtered in. The sunshine streaming through the windows drove back the shadows, and it was possible, almost, to believe the night had been nothing more than exhaustion and an overactive imagination. Bill walked me to my car. In the parking lot, in the morning light, he looked tired, but less frightened. "If you decide to come back," he said, "remember the rule. Don't go up to the 4th floor. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't go up there." I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the night. When I got to my apartment, I couldn't sleep, despite my exhaustion. I kept seeing that shadow spreading under the door, kept hearing those wet footsteps approaching. I called in sick for the next 3 nights. But bills don't stop coming because you're scared, and no one was hiring for decent-paying day shifts. On the 4th night, I went back. Bill seemed relieved to see me. "You don't have to do this," he said when I arrived. "Yeah," I said, "I do." The first hour of my shift was uneventful. I did my initial rounds, checked the cameras, settled into the routine. Maybe it had been a fluke, I told myself, one weird night caused by a combination of circumstances that wouldn't repeat. At 11:45 p.m., I was proven wrong. The motion detection alert appeared on my screen. Motion detected. East wing, floor 4, corridor B. This time, I was ready for it. I pulled up the camera list, confirming what I already knew. The 4th floor cameras were offline, yet somehow the system had detected movement. I logged the incident and tried to continue my work. At 12:03 a.m., motion detected, East Wing, Floor 4, Room 403. At 12:17 a.m., motion detected, East Wing, Floor 4, Corridor A. At 12:33 a.m., motion detected, East Wing, Floor 4, Stairwell. The alerts were coming faster now, tracking movement through the 4th floor, room to corridor to stairwell, like someone was walking a deliberate path toward the stairs, toward my floor. I called Bill immediately. "It's happening again," I said when he answered. "The motion alerts. It's like something's moving around up there." "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Do not go up there." "I won't," I promised. I watched the monitors, my hands clenched into fists. The alerts had stopped, the last one indicating movement in the stairwell connecting the 4th floor to the 3rd. At 12:47 a.m., a notification I'd never seen before appeared. Motion detected, East Wing, Floor 3, Stairwell. Whatever was moving had left the 4th floor. It was coming down.
I switched to the third-floor camera views, focusing on the east wing stairwell door. The camera angle didn't give me a perfect view, but I could see enough. The door that should have been locked, that should have been chained shut, swung open. Nothing appeared in the doorway. The corridor beyond remained empty. But on the camera feed, I watched as the emergency lights in that hallway began to flicker, one by one, starting at the stairwell and moving down the corridor. As each light stuttered and dimmed, it created a wave of advancing darkness, rolling toward the main part of the third floor like a shadow tsunami. My radio crackled. The ICU nurse, her voice tight with panic. "Marcus, what's going on with the lights up here?" "I don't know," I said, watching the darkness spread. "Get everyone out of that wing, now!" "We can't just evacuate the ICU." "Do it!" I shouted, abandoning all pretense of calm. "Get everyone out of the east wing. Get them to the other side of the building." I didn't wait to hear her response. I was already moving, grabbing my flashlight, my radio, my keys. If there were patients in that wing, if there were nurses, I couldn't just sit in my office and watch. Bill's warning echoed in my mind. Don't go up to the fourth floor. But I wasn't going to the fourth floor. I was going to the third to help evacuate. At least, that's what I told myself. The elevator felt too slow, too exposed. I took the stairs instead, climbing two at a time, my flashlight bouncing wildly. When I burst onto the third floor, the scene was controlled chaos. Nurses were moving patients on gurneys, wheeling them toward the west wing. Someone had activated an emergency protocol, and the hallways were filled with purposeful movement. But the east wing corridor was empty. Everyone had already evacuated, except for whoever or whatever had come down from the fourth floor.
I walked toward the east wing, my flashlight the only source of illumination as the emergency lights continued to flicker and fail. The darkness seemed to retreat before me, pulling back, drawing me forward, drawing me toward the stairwell door. It stood open, revealing the concrete stairs leading up. The fourth floor waited above, silent and dark. I knew I shouldn't go up. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, to wait for Bill, to let someone else handle this. But I thought about Sarah Vance, about a young woman, sick and scared, who'd ended up hanging in a sealed tunnel with no explanation for how she got there. About the patients who'd tried to kill themselves because she asked them to. And I thought about the nurses who'd just evacuated, about the fear in their voices. If there's something up there, something that could hurt people, I needed to know what it was. I climbed the stairs. The fourth floor was exactly as wrong as I'd imagined. The air felt thick, resistant, like pushing through water. My flashlight beam seemed to die just a few feet in front of me, swallowed by a darkness that felt almost solid. The stairwell door at the top was propped open with a rubber wedge, a safety violation that should have been impossible on a locked floor. I stepped through into corridor B. The smell hit me first. Antiseptic and decay, medicine and rot, all mixed together in a nauseating combination. Old hospitals have a particular odor, but this was different. This was wrong. I moved forward slowly, my flashlight playing across doors with faded room numbers. 401, 402, 403, room 403. The same room where Sarah Vance had stayed. The same room where 3 patients had attempted suicide. The door was open. I didn't want to look inside. Every instinct I had told me to run, to get off this floor, to let the darkness keep its secrets. But I looked anyway. The room was empty. A hospital bed frame without a mattress. A chair lying on its side. Graffiti on the walls. Some of it crude, some of it disturbing. Drawings and words that looked like they'd been scratched with fingernails rather than written with markers. And on the far wall, in letters that seemed to shimmer in my flashlight beam, "Help me, I'm still here." My radio crackled. Bill's voice, barely audible through heavy static. "Marcus, where?" "Fourth floor," I said. "Room 403. Out now, coming." The static grew worse, then cut off entirely. I was alone. That's when I heard the crying. Soft, broken sobs coming from somewhere down the corridor. A woman's voice, choked with anguish, crying like her heart was breaking. I left room 403 and followed the sound. Past 404, 405, 406. The crying grew louder, more desperate, interspersed with words I couldn't quite make out. The corridor ended at a nurse's station, and beyond that, a set of double doors marked Authorized Personnel Only Treatment Wing. The crying was coming from behind those doors. I pushed through. This section of the 4th floor was different. Smaller rooms with reinforced doors, observation windows, padding on some of the walls. The old psychiatric ward, where they kept patients who were considered dangerous to themselves or others. The crying had stopped. The silence that replaced it was absolute. No ambient building sounds, no distant voices, nothing. Just my breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. "Sarah," I called out, my voice cracking. "Sarah Vance." A door at the end of the hallway opened. Not slowly, not with the creaking horror movie cliche. It simply swung open, fast and hard, slamming against the wall with a bang that echoed through the corridor. In the darkness of that doorway, something moved. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. I ran back through the treatment wing, through the double doors, down corridor B toward the stairwell. My flashlight jerked wildly, creating a strobe effect that made the hallway seem to pulse and writhe. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Those same wet, heavy footsteps from the night before, but faster now. Running. Chasing me. I hit the stairwell at full speed and nearly fell down the stairs. My flashlight slipped from my hand and bounced away into the darkness below. I didn't stop to retrieve it. I used the railing to guide me, stumbling down in the dark, my pursuer's footsteps echoing from above. I burst through the 3rd floor door and straight into Bill. He grabbed my shoulders, steadying me. "What happened? What did you see?" I couldn't speak. I could only point back at the stairwell, gasping for breath. Bill looked past me at the door to the 4th floor. It was closed now. The padlock and chain were back in place, exactly as they should be. "That's impossible," I managed to say. "I just came through there. It was open. It's been open." "Marcus," Bill said gently, "that lock hasn't been opened in 18 months. I check it myself every week." "No," I insisted. "No, I was just up there. I saw room 403. I heard." "What did you hear?" "Crying. A woman crying. And then something chased me." Bill's face went pale. He pulled out his own flashlight and checked the lock more carefully. "It's rusted shut," he said. "Look at it. This thing hasn't been opened in months, maybe years." But I had been up there. I had seen those rooms. I had read that graffiti on the wall. Hadn't I? Bill called for backup, 2 other security guards who worked different shifts. While we waited for them to arrive, he took me back to the security office and made me review the camera footage. The 3rd floor cameras showed me arriving from the stairwell, talking with the nurses, walking toward the east wing. They showed me approaching the stairwell door. And they showed me standing there, motionless for 17 minutes. Just standing, staring at the locked door. Not moving, not speaking. And then they showed me jerking suddenly, as if waking from a dream, and running back down the hallway toward Bill. I went up there, I said, watching myself on the screen. I climbed those stairs. I was in those rooms. "Marcus," Bill said carefully, "you never opened that door. You stood in front of it for 17 minutes, and then you ran." The other guard arrived and went to check the 4th floor. They came back 20 minutes later, shaking their heads. All the doors were locked. All the chains were secure. There was no evidence anyone had been up there. They made me go home. Bill insisted, said I needed rest, that we'd sort everything out later. But I knew what I'd experienced. I knew the difference between reality and hallucination. I had been on the 4th floor. I had been in those rooms. Hadn't I? I stopped working at St. Augustine's hospital that night. I couldn't go back. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that darkness in the doorway, heard those wet footsteps chasing me down the stairs. Bill tried to call me a few times in the weeks that followed. I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to relive it. 3 months later, I saw a news article online. St. Augustine's Hospital was finally completing the renovations on the 4th floor of the East Wing. They'd be reopening it as a general medical ward in the spring. The article included a photo of the renovation crew. In the background, barely visible in the window of room 403, I could see something that made my blood run cold. A figure, pale and indistinct, standing in the window, looking out, looking at the camera. I zoomed in on the photo, my hands shaking. The figure was blurry, but I could make out enough details. Long dark hair, a hospital gown, and eyes that seemed to stare directly into the lens, directly at me, with an expression of profound sadness. The caption under the photo read, "Workers report no unusual incidents during renovation of former psychiatric ward." But I know better. I know that Sarah Vance is still there, still walking those corridors, still crying in the darkness, still asking for help. And I know that whoever goes to work on that floor, whoever ends up assigned to those rooms, is going to experience something that will change them forever. Just like it changed me. I still wake up at 2:47 a.m., the exact time when the temperature dropped in the security office that first night. I still hear footsteps in my apartment sometimes, though I know I live alone. And sometimes, just for a moment before I fully wake, I see her standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with those sad, wet eyes. The hospital administration was right about one thing. What happened on the 4th floor of St. Augustine's wasn't supernatural. It was worse than that, because somewhere in that building, in those sealed tunnels and locked rooms, Sarah Vance died alone and afraid. And the living failed her so completely that even death couldn't set her free. That's not a ghost story. That's a tragedy. And tragedies don't have happy endings. They just have survivors who learn to live with the memory of what they experienced, of what they couldn't prevent, of what still waits in the darkness for the next person to make the mistake of looking too closely. I made that mistake. I looked. I listened. I went where I shouldn't have gone. And now I can never unknow what's waiting on the 4th floor. That was my experience at St. Augustine's Hospital. 3 years later, I still don't have all the answers. I don't know if what I saw was real or if something on that floor affected my mind, made me see things that weren't there. I don't know if Sarah Vance is truly trapped there, or if the guilt and tragedy of her death has somehow imprinted itself on that place in ways we don't understand. What I do know is this: some places remember. Some places hold on to pain and fear and suffering like a sponge soaking up water. And some places don't let go. If you've ever experienced something similar, if you've worked a night shift where the rules seemed to change, where reality felt thin, where you encountered something that defied explanation, I want to hear about it. Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know that others have felt that same terror, that same certainty that what you're experiencing is real, even when everyone tells you it isn't. Share this story. Comment below with your own experiences. Like this if it resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've tried to forget. And whatever you do, if you work the night shift somewhere old, somewhere with history, somewhere that feels just slightly wrong in ways you can't quite explain, trust your instincts. Don't go where you're not supposed to go. Don't ignore the rules that keep you safe. And if you hear footsteps where there shouldn't be any, if you see lights in windows that should be dark, if you feel watched by eyes you can't see, run. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some doors are locked for a reason. I learned that the hard way. Don't make the same mistake I did.